So there are many ways of looking at India. One, it's amongst the very few fast-growing large economies. Two, as a country of 1.2 billion people, where 65% of the population is less than age. Or three, as having the third largest startup ecosystem in the world, leaving no ambiguity about its future potential. This next panel will deliberate on what the future of consumption in fast-growth consumer markets look like. Please welcome the moderator for this session, Devina Gupta, anchor, to set the context and introduce the rest of the panel. Devina, the stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. It's my first time here at NASScom, and I'm really excited. And as I was introduced very kindly by the lady, I work with the BBC World News on a show called Work Life India. It's a weekly show that comes from India every Friday, 9 p.m. And I'm not trying to pitch it before our next panel comes on, but I just want to say that I completely agree the future of India is us, the consumers, and what better way to start this session than by inviting the whole range of experience which is in store with this panel. 65% of population that is less than 35 years of age, the third ecosystem in the world which is here, the digital capabilities of the future of consumption that rests on marrying these two. So let me introduce, without wasting any time, Joint Managing Director, Apollo Hospital. Please welcome her with a great round of applause. Dr. Han, now I hope I spelled that right, Chairman, the Boston Consulting Group. Welcome. And Kunal Bell, co-founder and CEO of Snapdeal Private Limited. Mic working. Thank you so much. Are we good to go, guys? Yes? Anybody here without a phone? No, everybody's here. Okay, so then we don't have the fourth panelist here. I was thinking what an interview that would be. And for that, I want to ask you, Kunal, because imagine India, a country where smartphones are more than the public states and still growing. Isn't that the growth story right now when we talk about the innovation and consumer growth?
Yeah, I think our country is going through a tectonic shift, particularly over the last 3 to 4 years. And when we look ahead, let's say 10 years from now, when we look back as to what was the period where India was the most significant change that set up the foundations for consumption, particularly digital fueled consumption, it would probably be these years, 2016 to 2019. I would say 4 things have happened. One is the geo-led 4G revolution. Suddenly the connectivity has grown immensely. Phone, the per capita GB data consumption has gone up 10 to 15x just in the last 3 years. The proliferation of payment systems, because suddenly for everything you want to sell, you don't have to collect cash for it. You can now sell it and get paid digitally. The third would be, which is more qualitative, just growing aspiration, right? Which has suddenly, I think that aspiration has also grown because of digital connectivity. Because now young guys, teenagers sitting in small towns are looking at the Bollywood actors and what they are wearing, and their cousins in the big cities, what they are watching or eating. And they have the same aspiration, may not have access to the same resources, but they definitely have the same aspiration. Resources will come. And fourth and finally, I think, is a lot of this fuel in the consumer markets is being driven by the startup ecosystem. Not only by it, but also by it. And I think to that, I'd say this government over the last few years has really made part of the national vocabulary as a positive thing. When I started my company a decade back, it was something we had to hide from our parents. But now obviously things are very different. So I'm very, very optimistic that we have the right foundations laid out, and irrespective of near-term ripples on the macro stuff, we are really well set up for success.
But Sangeeta, where do you see the consumer demand in India at the moment?
So clearly consumer demand has been, along with the GDP, slightly more than 7%. In certain sectors went upwards of 25-30%. Mobile phones was over 45% in some categories. The fact that we do need to face is the last 6 months, consumer demand has gone down, and that, I think, is the significant point, is that it has to the slowing in industrial growth. And this is a tremendous time for India because, as Kunal said, the foundation is laid. The infrastructure exists, the age and the demographic, the innovation is ripe. You look across the world, you know, so many models which are emerging and getting Indianized, so to speak. There's voice, video, vernacular, mobile, such a tremendous platform laid. I think we need to, you know, look for a second in the entire space of consumerism and overlay the fact that there is a tremendous value to sentiment of, is this the time to spend, or are people postponing purchase? That there's a tremendous value to trust, because who do I, you know, whether it's my savings or my, you know, my education or 10% of my salary if you're buying consumer goods. So there's that aspect. And I think the third and, you know, very interesting aspect is, have we appropriated the changing face of consumerism? What percentage of the household went into FMCG? What went into, you know, typically education was one of the biggest savings that many households made. And now that that is getting taken care of, where does the next layer go? We're very used to free entertainment. But with the size of the entertainment industry globally, will the entire new age of entertainment and consumerism converge? So I think I'd just like to say that consumers will follow a certain global pattern, yet they will be typically Indian. I think consumers face a certain sentiment and therefore would like to go to trust, and the ability to tie up with trusted brands and use the new age technologies, a winning formula. And I was talking to you about that one. And then go even further to companies that invest in creating those trusted brands are the ones which are clearly the winners of the future if they're riding on technology. I want to make one other, you know, slightly different statement, because I was reading this and it really interested and excited me, is that I think the future is clearly here faster than we see it. We got a few months of a temporary breather. Something's going to pick up again, and tremendously. But if you look at the history of the world, one of the biggest leaders of change, of innovation, was actually migration. When slaves moved to Africa, Turks and the Ottomans, you know, changed their geography. When Germany forced its population to move. And where they went, they took with them consumer cultural behaviors, purchasing preferences, the India-Pakistan. And you're wondering, why am I giving you history in this time of the future? The fact is, the biggest migration in the world is going to happen right now. And I'm not talking about the Earth's migration to Mars, which, you know, some people would have us do.
Or Elon Musk is betting on.
Or Elon Musk is betting on. But I'm actually talking about a migration which is happening at the switch of a button, which is from the real world into the artificial world. And consumerism is going to be driven by AR and virtual reality and AI and a different level of machining, whether it's the Oculus or the way you view this new world. And they will tell you how to buy it immediately. And they will tell you how you can buy this service so you look 10 years, feel 20 years younger. And that change in the way consumers think, decide, and ultimately impact economies is a new migration which is happening here and now. And one of the slightly unexplored areas in that migration, will you understand this space inside out? You can do AI, VR, you can do all these things. I think the impact of the psychological reason behind decision making, of what's inside that human mind. And as a healthcare person, that's why I'm throwing these up. That migration is happening, but the ability to decipher decision making in this world of consumerism, you will have your numbers pat, you know, whether it's the millennials and how they're going to impact purchasing and how they're digital natives and they know how to use these older people who haven't quite figured out and are just comfortable with WhatsApp is there. But what you choose and how you choose is going to be the big consumerism and booming economies and which company wins or loses. Not just a wave, it's a highly personalized journey. And in that, the companies who figure out that personalization, that trust building, that forecasting of what works for who and how, and the psychological insights to behaviors and decision making on purchasing, I think those are the companies that are really going to make it in the next generation.
Well, very well said. Did you ever know being consumer is such a big task? You have huge responsibilities on your shoulders and the palm of your hand, so exercise it responsibly. But let me also get Hans' comments on this, because Hans, these two are optimists in the panel. You said I'm a realist as well. Oh. And, well, because I need to address the elephant, as we said earlier, that India's central bank has said that right now sentiment is perhaps one of the lowest in the recent decade. The IMF has said economic slowdown, there's an Indian economy slowdown. So where do you see this driver of which Indian economy had been on the world map?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to see that we have a wave-like process, you know, in terms of growth around the world, and of course, with a clear trajectory, the trajectory is positive. But around this trajectory, we have ups and downs. And of course, at the moment, we are at a bit of a slower growth rate. You know, it doesn't mean the economy has negative growth. It's just a slower growth rate. And I think we should not extrapolate, you know, the current trend, you know, for the next 5 years and into the ground. You know, so there will be an up again over the coming 24, I'm sure. But and I think we need to keep this in mind. So, you know, there's a wave-like process. The trend line is positive. The tech space and technology will fundamentally change, as we already heard before, you know, consumer behavior. There's much more transparency. But also there is a much bigger ease of doing business, of entering a market, entering products and services, becoming known, really attacking the incumbents. And so I'm not so sure, Judita, whether, you know, the trusted brands are safe. I would say, you know, they can be easily attacked. We will see a lot more, and we have already seen a lot new brands, you know, Mama Earth, for example, you know, people entering the market within a few months becoming a hot name, a hot brand, through the social media, you know, bypassing all the traditional advertising channels, and really attacking the big brands. We see more, and you know, I think what we also see is that there, you know, a lot of push, especially by Indian companies who are experimenting, and also the established players, you know, are a lot more experimenting than their, let's say, their colleagues, you know, in Europe or North America. So what we found in our work is that, you know, India becomes a very vibrant place, trying out things, new products, new services, based on a very Indian experience. And I think that gives me also great optimism for the future, even though, of course, there's still many households, as you rightly emphasized beforehand, you know, for the basics. But I think, you know, the approach that we have here ultimately lead to, you know, a doubling, quadrupling of the economy going forward, and also a much higher standard of living over the coming years and decades. So India, in many ways, is at the forefront. We have a lot of experimentation. We have a lot of startups, and so I think there will be a lot lessons to learn from Indian experience in the coming.
It's an interesting point what Hans is bringing about, and this was also highlighted in the BCG 10 Trends Altering Consumer Behavior in India, that 50% of people in Indian cities, according to the survey, bypass internationally famous brands to buy Indian manufacturers and Indian names. So is there sort of an economic nationalism that you are seeing at the moment?
I don't think I have not seen Indian consumers look at the flag at the back of a product's packaging and decide whether they want to buy it or not. I think you want to buy good quality products or good quality services at great prices. Nothing drives consumption for the vast majority of consumers than these two factors, and obviously aided by distribution, whether they actually have access to it or not. Just on this point, what we are seeing right now is tremendous amount of disruption that is happening by what we call challenger brands.
Okay.
Where thanks to the incredible amount of investments that have been made over the last few years in building the rails for supply chain, rails for payments, rails for e-commerce distribution, digital advertising, idea, a strong point of view that here is a part of the market or here is a portfolio of products that I feel I can do better at in terms of the functionality of the product or functionality of the service. Suddenly, you can get distribution, both from a logistics as well as demand amplification standpoint. Ever could, until even 4 or 5 years ago. This is a very recent phenomenon. Consumers, we are seeing not, last 1 year we had over 30 million people who bought from just our platform. Just 10% was from the top 15 cities. So, 90% of these 30 million people came from really, really small towns. And we don't sell any brands. We sell only local, or we don't sell any of the classic international brands that you would only sell locally manufactured brands, some that you would call actually labels, right? Manufacturers saying, I'm no longer going to just manufacture for other brands, I'm going to make my own product and stick a label on it. And consumers are saying, great. Other consumers are saying this is a great product. I think it is value. And I know I'm broadly get the product in the shape and form I like. I can send it back. Indian consumers are at a velocity that I have not seen in the at least early days of e-commerce, which is very, very encouraging. If you are an entrepreneur out there and you want to build a product that's going to disrupt the large incumbents, whether it's fashion, FMCG, or any of those large category players in physical products, you can do it and build the next Unilever in India in the next 20 years and only digitally. Right? That was never possible before. It took 100 years for those companies to build their distribution in our country.
I would slightly disagree. In the next 20 years, I think you have to reinvent yourself every few years. Right. So I think even if you start now and are very successful, I would say in 2-3 years you have to come up with the next idea. Otherwise, you can become quite stale. And then the next is one of the key elements is to never to stand still, but really to next idea and the next idea and the next idea.
Well, the potential disruptors are all sitting in this room. Next 10 years, you'll have another brilliant idea over here. But Sangeeta, you talked about trusted brand and Apollo's journey based on trust and credibility, which started in 1970s. Now, can you take us through what has been the learning curve for your father and also the group at the moment to make a trusted brand so that it becomes a global brand as well?
So, super interesting. It's really a very universal lesson, and that is understand what the customer wants. Because Apollo started because my father lost a young man who came to raise the money and get his visa to go to the US for heart surgery. India at that time, heart surgery program So he said, Indian doctors are curing and healing people all over the world. Let's try to do so in India. And when you gave quality, the customers figured it out and they came. They came from all over the country. They came from neighboring countries. We continue to serve over 121 countries. I think in this journey of 36 years, continue to stay close to the customer, continue to innovate, stay true to your core purpose to make people get better, be truthful and honest about what you do. So if you're charging, tell them upfront this is what it's going to cost, and let them make that decision making in terms of the value cut. And then continue to innovate. So today, if we're doing about 10 to 12,000 consults per day in the physical environment, we're doing about an equivalent amount in the virtual environment. So we've understood this coexistence of physical and digital. I think the customer has moved of wanting to be 36 years ago, whatever the doctor said, he listened. The doctor was God. Today, thank you, Google, or no thank you, whatever, but the customer will question. And I think using that innate interest that the individual has, it moves a brand to equip him with the right information, not just at that point. But now what we're really doing is seeing and riding this wave that care is moving from the hospital to the clinic, from the clinic to the home, and from the home to a 24/7 ubiquitous access to care by that mobile phone. And care is not about going to a doctor when you're sick, but finding a way to stay healthy. Care is about individuals, and again, referring to the room, 50% of this room is going to live to be more than 100. So how are we going to handle the healthcare and the well-care of people and a generation or 2-3 generations who will live longer than their forefathers did? So all these are changing environments, changing technologies, changing beliefs and behavior systems, and at the crux, use technology to serve the customer, stay close to the customer. That's my very simple lesson.
Sandra said earlier in the session that extrapolate doctors from now to 2030 from primary healthcare, 80% he believes will be driven by technology.
I totally agree, and I think it's going to be a powerful one. And here, I mean, I have to the doctors, I 100% believe in artificial intelligence, but my hope is that in the healthcare field, it'll be intelligence. That it'll enable people to do what is the routine, systematize the routine so that they can be exceptional, and humanize the exceptional experience by giving more per routine is taken care of. So I think there's a flip on the use of AI in healthcare, and I would drive that very aggressively, doing it, whether it's cardiac risk scores or predictive analysis or standard treatment guidelines. Future is incredible. But I want to go one step more, and actually, there's not just the tech, it's the convergence of the tech, the infrastructure, the manufacturing process. I met in San Francisco a lady who's pioneered and this thing, the 120 lung transplants using 3D printing of artificial lungs with stem cell infusion. So it's the convergence of robotics, biogenetics, 3D printing, a new manufacturing. I mean, what if the whole supply chains got disrupted? And the consumer wants delivery today. You're not managing inventory because you're actually doing 3D printing. So whenever I refer to tech, encompassing the entire convergence of all new technologies which are impacting manufacturing, supply chain, and perception and marketing in a completely different way, while parallelly new cures, new innovations. I mean, in 15 years from now, imagine if nobody would die of a heart attack. Even better, nobody would die of cancer. Cure and immunotherapy and CAR T cells are at that cutting edge. 20% of cancers which cause death. Today we're saying cancer is conquerable. So at the underlying aspect is science which is changing. So while you're banning plastics, you're bringing in bio-friendly material. I think the environment is going to be a huge making, and the environment and environmental friendly companies are going to be huge deciders in consumer behavior as well. I would rather buy from a consumer who's not spoiled, from a manufacturer who's not spoiling the environment for my children or grandchildren.
But I would
points.
like
Yes,
to,
go
I
ahead,
would like
Hans.
to add one.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about convergence, and you only. I would also say combining technology and people, or people and technology.
Totally agree.
As you rightly said, I think the doctor, supported with by technology or artificial intelligence, diagnosis can be better and more targeted. But I think, paint this picture of we will all be replaced by robots or machines.
No.
Yeah, and I think, and it creates anxieties. Maybe not think you will be the one to create the technology, but all the rest of the people, the drivers, the consultants, or they will all be replaced by some AI system. But I think, we need to make sure that we really increase the productivity of people by helping them technology or added technology. I think assisted intelligence. I think we really help people become more productive at all levels, consumption or production process, the transportation, the delivery mechanisms, and so forth, so that they all not fear technology, but really see technology as an enabler. And I think this is really critical, because otherwise consumer sentiment can only be positive if people also feel that there's more income for them, and that they have a job, and that they have, a job where they can make a decent income.
Well, and that brings me to the next. Go ahead, Sangeeta.
No, so I have just one, which is that I don't know, what the future or this future of jobless growth. But one thing in our control, and it's important for us to start doing now, is focusing on index along with productivity, is focusing on a methodology to create a sense of self-worth and figure the world doesn't get gauged only by, how big is your company, how rich is your company, and, how much can we change some of this dialogue so that we begin to start preparing for this new world. And I know it's a deep in this thing, but I just wanted to put a little bit of a footnote there so that people continue to think about what is this new world that we are creating.
A world without jobs, work is important not just for your self-worth, but also for structuring the day. I mean, the entrepreneurs, if you were given a certain basic income, you would continue to work. You would not change your lifestyle. But, if people have never learned how to get up in the morning at 7, work through the day, earn a decent income, that will have detrimental effects. So let's, put things into perspective and not talk about happiness indexed by some, high income earners, and forget to help, the large part of the population to have a decent, structured life.
Well, Hans, your argument is also the classic argument which could get into the political realm of universal basic. To that in another conversation. But Kunal, let me come to the point which I think both of them have discussed quite passionately, is tech-driven businesses and the businesses that are also supporting gig economy. Now, you had a statement from the country's finance minister saying millennials prefer to ride old, but that's actually affecting auto industry as well. So there is some merit to the argument that technology is, yes, changing the businesses, but also changing the way employment is generated. And for that, how the skill gap is filled.
Yeah, so I think the sands will keep shifting from time to time. The skills that are needed to even run a company like ours 5 years ago are very different from the skills we need today. I can imagine that companies that have been around for even longer, or industries that have been around for even longer, that change has to happen there as well. But I think the smartest companies figure that out, right? And some won't figure it out also. And that doesn't necessarily only apply to the traditional industry, it also applies to the world of startups as well. That's why you see the mortality rate being so high, not only for early stage startups, but also for later stage companies, where they go through their own trials and tribulations and figure out, can they change how they operate their businesses, how do they recruit the talent which has the skills that are like practical examples. In 2011-12, Facebook was still one of the big drivers of e-commerce in India over the last few years actually has been Facebook. Who did marketing in 2011-12, if they didn't upskill themselves to know how to leverage Facebook as a channel of demand amplification, they'd probably be irrelevant right now. While that applies at an individual level, it also applies at a company level. If a company didn't build those skill sets, even in this very new age economy, irrelevant. I think, but the fundamental point, I want to bring it back, I think there's some interesting discussion here, is that I'm actually quite optimistic about the direction in which we, from a consumption standpoint, there's a lot of talk about slowing consumption, growth, not being there. But the best is yet to come. In, when China was at $2,000 per capita GDP, the largest checks that were written then were $20 million, compared to $20 billion checks that are written in India. That means that we have somehow we are blessed that global investors are willing to bet on India's potential so far back or so far ahead into the future, where they're willing to invest billions of dollars today at a time when China only got tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars in the, let's say, consumer internet space, which is what is built on of infrastructure, education about about all these digital services and products. And that makes me very optimistic that as our per capita GDP goes from $2,000 to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, the rate, and we will see a significant hockey stick adoption of at least digital in the coming years.
So which are the sectors that you would bet on in digital services?
I think it's a feeding frenzy right now. I think you should turn to gold eventually.
Midas touch. But Sangeeta Health, one which always had defensive stocks as well, but it is also one where we've seen more needs to be done, especially in the rural belt, because there's always going to be a need for that. Now, how are you looking filling this gap, and how are you looking at the future of innovation so that the poorest of the poor can be served?
So, I think I completely agree with you. But before I jump into the healthcare, I just want to put one point in there. And sorry for this, but this thing is that I think the job and the skills issue for us to, not really face it head on. 10 to 12 million youth in the job market every single year. India needs to tap that for a potential disaster, social unrest, whatever it is. And for that, ask very quickly, if by show of hands, do you believe that the engineers or the people who come into your companies have the skill sets they need to do their job? How many say yes, we're able to recruit the type of people we need from their fresh engineering schools?
Okay.
1, 2, 3, thank you. 4. So 5.
Seems to be minority in the room.
Right, scary thing. So how can we push for, and I didn't want to waste this opportunity of so many talented people from NASScom here to say, can we please push for greater industry, academia interface, smarter edutech, faster delivery, because on one side it's almost a crisis. Yet and on the other side, you have a need. You're growing at this tremendous pace. I'm an optimist. We solution appropriately so that we can bring these people into mainstream workforce. Just a plug into the greater 50%. We need more workforce. The gig economy allows it. Please push for these two things as much as you can to NASScom. But then quickly coming back to healthcare. Face of healthcare is absolutely changing, there is no doubt. We will do surgeries, but they will be minimally invasive, they will be faster, you'll get back to work better, your antibiotic use will be smarter, your post therapies will be more focused, and your whole treatment plan will be based. But moving further, the smartest solutioning is in keeping people out of hospitals. So we are working on a plan to say that we want more than 50% of our revenue to come from people who are kept healthy and out of the hospital, because we will focus on wellness, prevention. We will focus on, thank you, and we really mean it. We will work on predictive score, what causes disease, so that who was fine yesterday, who doesn't smoke and drink and still had a heart attack, and his wife is. So these are the type of things that today's science technology can get together with the human sentiment and find cures, and that's what we're focusing on. So every aspect, and I could spend 1.5 hours on that alone, but you have such, so I'm not getting into it. The crux is that healthcare will adopt technology like never before. Your imaging will be better, your data collection will be better. My request to all of you is to become proactive about your health, to store your own data, store it carefully, so that it builds into the models of tomorrow in terms of artificial intelligence, and we're trying to do that as well. Build data consortiums, global data, so that we become far more creative and productive and proactive about healthcare than passively finding the best possible cures. And doctoring job, but that was for last century.
Yeah, I mean,
the next
right now we have
years.
coronavirus challenge right in front of us. And
Absolutely.
could do the rotavirus magic that they did in 2018
Absolutely.
to develop a vaccine from here for the world. Why not? But Hans, I've been told that we're completely out of time. So you get the last word. For India's story, what is your learning? What is your message? What should change and how?
Well, we need to make sure in the wider context of the economy that the financial sector is getting back on a stable footing. That's really crucial. I mean, you all know this is a truism, but it's really crucial because we see, you know, whether it's housing, whether it's automotive, two-wheelers, they do depend on credit. And without credit, you know, these sectors will be impacted with less construction. Rural incomes will be lower than they should be or last. So I think there is a lot of some fundamental work to do, including, you know, the key issue of improving regulatory in order to make investment, establishing of factories and easier. Progress has been made. You know, I've seen it over the last 25 years. India has made enormous progress. But a lot more needs to be done in order to make this a very, very attractive place. The ingenuity of the Indian people is clearly enormously strong. I mean, you have not just entrepreneurs in this room, but all over the world, Indian entrepreneurs are, you know, creating lots of new technology, new businesses. Let's bring this ingenuity to work, you know, and a very vibrant economy and vibrant growth, and get back on a trajectory which is even faster, you know, than hopefully this we had in the past.
But in how many years?
Sorry?
In how many years? 6 to 7%, very quickly.
Well, you know, I think to 6-7% in the coming 24 months.
24 months, that's
I agree with that. I agree
All right,
with
I
that.
know we're completely out of time, but just taking permission for 5 minutes for any
one line.
questions that we might have.
And I have just one line, which is, you know, wearing my FICCI hat, I think it's very important for the government to put hands. We have to spur consumerism. So just that one line as well.
I'm welcoming it. But any question, because we're going to wrap up really fast. So any questions in the room? Yes, one hand there from the gentleman, please. Yes, please, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Gita. The concept around storing data and storing, having personalized information, sharing. How do you and Apollo look at mergers and acquisitions in terms of startups, or actually looking at how do you look at this healthcare sectors and M&A with startups to acquire these companies that are actually focusing on, especially on healthcare startups, but they're doing some fantastic work. How do you, in your field, look at the startup world, especially in Bangalore?
So we're continuously looking at startups. While we haven't done acquisitions, we have done partnering. We believe that there's a tremendous energy in the startup ecosystem and environment. But going to sort of two questions baked in there, which is the whole data piece. I think the data beyond Apollo, we currently have, in a fantastic state, about 18 to 20 million health records. But the framework that I'm working with on, and have suggested to the government is really that we should find a uniform where people can use this data to build new models, whether it's standard treatment guidelines, etc. It's a trusted opt-in or opt-out. Its ability to share and collect standards, and then it's an ability to access that to build the new models of. So that's a different, kind of answer. And on the startups, I'm really happy to with anybody with a model that they believe will work for us or our customers.
Well, thank
you for the both.
So much. I'm really sorry we're out of time, but as Sangeeta said, they're all available offline if you'd like to chat with them. And I think one takeaway from me, discussion, that all of us are ambassadors of the Indian economy in a way. We are consumers, and of course, there is a worry about the future, but almost 24 months. We should be out there and shining, so stay with it. And thank you all so much for taking out time, and thank you all for being such a lovely audience.
Thank you so much, the minds of the amazing panelists that we had with us here. That ladies and gentlemen, just hold on. Devina, I'm going to ask you to hand over our appreciation to each of our panelists. I'm going to ask you to stay. So that panel spoke about a lot of angles that explored how access, how the consumer demand is growing, how the foundation and the infrastructure exists, and how there are global patterns but local consumers, and of course of the coexistence of the physical and the digital worlds, and the convergence of tech, infrastructure and manufacturing, combining technology and people anthropology, and of course talking about all of these contexts of healthcare or the online market sector. So thank you so much.